huge bad thing. Stuff
It's
that I
the
have.
worst feeling thinking that you're getting blamed for your husband's death.
This is Melissa Oxley. 5 hours before this footage was recorded, Melissa was living a picture-perfect life with her husband Ben and her 6-year-old stepdaughter, Alyssa. The couple had been married for over a year, and Melissa had even adopted Ben's daughter on the day of their wedding. She was the mother Alyssa never had. But on February 21, 2008, things took a disturbing turn for the worst. When at 3:30 a.m., Ben Oxley was found murdered in his bed with a shotgun wound to his head. His wife, Melissa, claimed she was asleep next to him, but saw nothing. She was covered in blood and was physically unharmed. Police are convinced she killed her husband. The problem is Melissa is innocent. The plot behind the murder of Ben Oxley would remain a mystery if it wasn't for one clever 6-year-old girl who wasn't asleep. That night, Alyssa saw something she should have never seen, and it could save her mother's life. It's 2004, in the town of Minden, Nevada. 32-year-old Ben Oxley is a newly single dad trying to rebuild his life after a somewhat bitter divorce. After gaining shared custody of his daughter Alyssa, he pours his whole heart into raising his 3-year-old. Together, they share a special bond like no other father and daughter. That's all he cared about was Alyssa. His priority was to take care of her. A year later, Ben meets a woman named Melissa, and it seems like almost instantly. In their first few conversations, sparks are already flying, as they plan to finally get married. It's February 21, 2008, 2 years after the happy wedding. At 3:30 a.m. on February 21, 2008, Melissa Oxley frantically calls 911 from her bedroom. She's just woken up next to the dead body of her husband, Ben, who's been murdered with a shotgun in his sleep. Police arrived at 3:55 a.m., but when police arrive, the front door is wide open. Police quietly make their way through the house. They find a dark figure lying in bed, covered by blankets, not moving. All of a sudden, a young man emerges from under the blankets. The 17-year-old is Melissa's younger brother named Craig, who was living with the family at the time. Police found Melissa. She's standing in the hallway. She's got blood on her clothing, and just in shock was her face, holding a phone in one hand and her stepdaughter in the other. Police quickly clear the rest of the house, finding no one else except the body of Ben Oxley in the master bedroom. There are no signs of a break-in, no shattered windows, no forced-in doors. Police is trying to figure out who is responsible for Ben's murder. Suspicion tightens on Craig when police find 2 shotgun shells on his nightstand. The ammunition is his. He's the only one in the family with an interest in guns. Craig had duck hunting equipment. Ben Oxley had been shot with a shotgun. That was very suspicious. However, despite 2 shotgun shells standing on his nightstand, Craig claims he was sleeping until police arrived. Investigators aren't convinced by Craig's story, but when the test results come back, the room falls silent. There's no gunpowder residue on his hands, no evidence that he fired a weapon. He was, as he claimed, in his room, asleep at the time of the murder. But the detectives don't believe Melissa. How could she have been sleeping right beside him and not noticed anything? To them, she's the only lead they have, but at this moment, they have no proof, no hard evidence to arrest her or to arrest anyone for that matter. But what the detectives don't know is that in the room next to the murder, the little girl wasn't asleep as she should have been. In fact, she was the only one in the house who saw something crucial that night. At this point, the investigation hits a wall, as they neither have any physical evidence putting Craig at the crime scene, nor any proof that Melissa has killed her husband, and police are forced to release both suspects. However, police then uncover a $400,000 life insurance policy Ben left behind, all of which would go to Melissa if he passed away. Though Melissa claimed to know nothing of the policy, this feels like a smoking gun, particularly to Ben's family, who feel that it's very possible that Melissa killed her husband for this big payout. With rumors swirling, now the whole town is closely watching this newly widowed woman, and they all have their own theories of how she escaped the murder charge. Everybody in town just assumed that his wife murdered him while he was sleeping. She's the prime suspect. She's the wife. She was lying in bed with him. It doesn't make sense that she wasn't shot. As the investigation goes on, to protect the little girl, a judge sends Alyssa back to her birth mother, Ben's ex-wife. Alyssa is left in a family she knows very little about, now living with her birth mother, Dawn's new boyfriend James, and her other children. The 6-year-old is dealing with the sudden grief and sadness of losing her father, a man who was always there for her, someone who cared for her, supported her, and sacrificed everything for her. His daughter was his priority. Alyssa was everything to him. He was so joyful, fun, loving dad, He drove himself to be the best he could be for Alyssa. The little girl is exposed to all the nasty rumors and accusations being thrown at her stepmom. Everyone around her is talking about her father's killer, and they're all pointing the finger at Melissa, especially her mother Dawn. One thing investigators did not expect was that Ben's 6-year-old daughter, Alyssa, could have been a witness. That she woke up at that night and heard the creak at the front door, and saw somebody walked in. She just recognized it as a person that was looking in on her. Alyssa's testimony drops a bombshell on detectives' theories about Melissa, and they begin going over everyone who might have had conflicts with Ben. But what they don't realize is that the true killer has actually been right under their noses. After Ben's death, Dawn finally gets her daughter back from her ex-husband, something that she's always wanted since the divorce several years prior. Thinking it's finally time to start a new life with little Alyssa, Dawn is unaware that the detectives are actively launching an investigation into her, and soon they discover that Dawn is not the mother that every daughter hopes for. In fact, it seems Dawn has a history of neglect of not providing for her daughter. Detectives begin to uncover Dawn's long history in and out of jail for her drug addiction, which turns out to be the exact reason why she lost custody of Alyssa to Ben in the divorce in the first place. The child custody dispute between Ben and Dawn that weighed heavily on Dawn, she took that very personally. In contrast to the happy family household Alyssa had with her father and stepmom, she must now deal with her mother's struggle with addiction to drugs and alcohol, petty crime, and neglect all over again. Investigators now bring Dawn in for an interview, trying to find out if she had any connection to Ben's murder and to figure out where she was the night of the murder. She stated that she was at the house the whole time and that was all that she knew. As Dawn tells investigators that James Matleen is her new friend, they soon discovered that he has a long history of being in and out of prison and has recently been living with Dawn for a while. The night of Ben's murder, he claims he was watching a movie with Dawn at home. Although this sounds like the perfect alibi, something doesn't sit well with the detectives. They starting to put James Matleen and Ben Oxley into the forefront of their investigation because police felt they had something to do with it. Now, James is brought into the police station for questioning. He sits across from detectives in a small room. The questions begin circling around one thing: his possible connection to the murder of Ben Oxley. There is no physical evidence, nothing to prove them guilty, and they both adamantly deny any involvement. But time is running out, and if James or Dawn are involved in the murder of Ben Oxley, 6-year-old Alyssa is in great danger. Melissa desperately hopes to be reunited with her stepdaughter, but legally, the police's hands are tied, and unless they have solid evidence against Dawn and James, they have no reason to take the girl away from them. Alyssa remains in the custody of her birth mother. With no other options, the police focus all their efforts on uncovering the truth. They need evidence, something solid to act on. That's when they turn to their next move: surveillance. They did open surveillance where they followed them and made sure they knew police were following them around, because they wanted to add pressure. As police started looking at Dawn and James Matleen, police started hearing a little bit about them being in a relationship, which was denied at first, and the question is, why was that held from police? Initial interviews at the house, they said they never left. Police obtained the surveillance video, found out James was at the convenience store at the morning of the homicide, so police know that now his story has changed. At first he never left the house, and now police know he's out and about in the early morning hours of the night of the homicide. Police finding holes in his story. So if they are lying, what else is not true? But even with the surveillance footage as proof that James was lying about his and Dawn's whereabouts the night of the murder, there still isn't enough evidence to arrest anyone. All other evidence leads to Melissa, who only wants one thing: to be back with her stepdaughter. Police are unsure where to turn next, when in a twist no one saw coming, a new voice emerges in the investigation, a voice that cuts deeper than any other: Dawn's own teenage son and Alyssa's half-brother, Devin. He walks into the police station, his face heavy with the weight of what he's about to reveal. He says there's something he needs to confess, something crucial that he saw at his mother's house the night before Ben's murder. Devin tells investigators about Dawn's rant that night. She hated Ben for ruining her life, for making her pay child support, and she blamed him for taking Alyssa away from her. Devin's account changes everything. Suddenly the walls close in on Dawn. Even her boyfriend James turns against her, coming forward with chilling details about the lies, the motive, and how Dawn was the true mastermind behind Ben's murder. With Ben out of the picture, Dawn would rid herself of the $200 monthly child support payment and gain custody of Alyssa. With Devin and James' testimonies, the cracks in Dawn's story were no longer cracks, they became gaping holes. Coming to terms with how Dawn had manipulated him all along, James recounts exactly what happened on the night of the murder. He tells investigators that both he and Dawn were in the Oxleys' house on the night of February 21, 2008. The scary dark figure standing in Alyssa's room was her own mother, Dawn. At this moment, James is ready. The shotgun sits heavy in his hands as he stands in the master bedroom, 2 shells loaded. Outside, Dawn rushes to start the car, the engine rumbling, ready for a quick getaway. Slowly, he raises the shotgun, aiming it squarely at Ben. Next, he pointed the gun at Melissa, his second victim. His finger hovered over the trigger, ready to end another life, but then something shifted. It's as if a wave of hesitation washed over him. Without firing, he lowered the weapon, turned and ran out of the room. Moments later, the sound of his footsteps faded as he rushed towards the car, leaving Melissa and the 6-year-old alive. With James' confession confirming their worst fears about Dawn, police are horrified that Alyssa had been in the custody of her father's murderers all along, but the 6-year-old's loyalties never wavered. She knew Melissa was entirely innocent and stuck up for her when no one else believed in her. She told police about the shadowy figure she saw that night who had proved to be the mastermind behind her father's death, none other than her own biological mother. After taking Dawn and James into custody, Alyssa is finally reunited with her beloved stepmother. Throughout the entire investigation, Melissa had fought for her stepdaughter. 4 years later, on January 31, 2012, however, with the solid proof that James was the one actually pulling the trigger, the evidence against Dawn now seems mainly limited to only claims of plotting and manipulation, and the case becomes circumstantial. Dawn manages to gain immunity to the murder charge in exchange for her testimony against James, ultimately betraying their supposed initial plan. James pleads guilty to first-degree murder and is sentenced to life without parole. Finally, Ben Oxley has justice, but then, just as James is being taken away to be imprisoned forever, Alyssa speaks up with a surprising and remarkable request. She wants to speak with her father's murderer, one-on-one. She told him that she decided to forgive him and that she wanted him to have hope. Despite the tears, grief, and pain of losing her father, Alyssa, at only 10 years old, found the extraordinary courage to forgive her dad's killer. She had only kindness and love to give, even in the face of all she had endured. This allowed her to start the journey of healing and begin to come to terms with the tragedy she experienced. With the guidance and love of her stepmother, Melissa, the pair made their own unlikely family together as true mother and daughter. Thanks for watching, Slay Site. Don't forget to subscribe for more updates.